So the presentation is Writing with Accessibility in Mind. During the presentation, we're going to be going over two topics. There's inclusive language and plain language. So accessible copywriting reaches the broadest audience. And so when you are utilizing inclusive language, what you would want to do is make sure that the tone and the word choice that you select is inclusive, it promotes equity, and that way you're sort of inviting your audience into your content and also limiting the opportunity for saying something that might be hurtful or offensive to your audience. And then plain language is a whole host of tools, which we'll spend the majority of today going over, but in a nutshell, it makes your content easy to understand. You're using words that are common. You are organizing your content in a specific way so that it's able to be understood. And it's just a really great way to break down your information. And also, side benefit, it translates into other languages more easily. The more easily you communicate in English, the easier it is to translate into other languages. I know a lot of folks are working on additional languages such as Spanish. So I found when I was at the Department of Revenue, that if you use complicated language, it's also more expensive to translate because you have to get a technical writer to translate instead of a traditional translator. So first we'll talk about inclusive language. And so sometimes this feels a little weird to start with a global audience. I've gotten feedback on this part in the past, but basically you're just going to assume that theoretically, this is not like a practical thing, that everyone in the world is going to read your information. And it just helps you to kind of take a long view of what you're writing. Obviously, you do still want to tailor your content to a specific audience. But if you kind of take a longer view, it helps with, again, making your content easier to be translated. Also making sure that you're selecting the language if you're putting this on the web. So for example, if you're using English, that's EN. And then if you're using Spanish, that's ES for Espanol, or how you say Spanish in Spanish. So also avoid using colloquialisms and phrases that are specific to one culture or demographic group or even region, or even like micro-region. Like I sometimes will find myself using phrases that I picked up while living in Northern Colorado, Northern California, or Chicago, the places I lived the majority of my life. So I try to really monitor that in myself and try to not use them, but I do slip. But just try to make sure that when you're doing your written communication, you are having a keen eye on expressions that you use regularly that are only understood in English or in our culture of America. And then don't make assumptions about your audience. Don't assume prior knowledge of the topic you're presenting or that they're going to be from any particular country or group. That will also be really helpful when you begin your written content. And then we recommend using person-first language. I know that there is a bit of a debate on this one, but unless you know without absolute certainty that the group that you're talking to prefers identity of first language, and I mean absolute certainty that it is the general consensus, not just one person or a few people that you know in that community prefer identity first, please use person first language. It centers your writing on the reader, and it eliminates a lot of opportunity for offense, because you want to make sure that your message and the recipient of the message are understood. And then Gabriella from CDLE has a great thing in chat here that I'll read aloud. Sometimes slang or spoken sarcasm can be taken out of context too. Thank you for that call out. Yes. And then again, using person-first language does eliminate some of the potential for your written communications to be perceived as sarcastic or condescending. So just really center it on the person. So for example, a person first in our context would be saying people with disabilities, or a person with a disability. Do not say disabled people, and definitely do not say the disabled. That is actually considered somewhat offensive. Alrighty, and then really on inclusive language, there's a few best practices to keep in mind. If you must speak about an audience member's characteristics, it needs to be relevant to the content. If it's not relevant to the content you're presenting, please leave it out because it's not necessary. And also be cautious of words that you're using that imply that someone is, sick or abnormal, have a disorder, or they are impaired. Again, this is a state of being for people. This is not something that is, a disorder. So just really keep in mind that this is more like, I like to think of things like a condition. It's just a state of being, not a disorder. And then avoid terms that might be perceived as condescending as well. So I know there's even a magazine called this, but really be careful with terms like diverse ability and handy capable, because a lot of people in the community of people with disabilities want you to understand that their life experience is different, and by using terms that are kind of condescending in their view might limit, the impact of their experience on their life. So don't diminish their experiences. And then also keep in mind that these norms change regularly, and so things like the term handicapped, which used to be used really, really commonly in government, are no longer considered acceptable. And again, it's a person with a disability or people with disabilities. And so please really investigate your content for this particular usage, because I know that it was very common as recently as a few years ago. And then also keep in mind your tone. So one thing to really keep in mind is ableism, both conscious and unconscious. And basically, ableism is a bias or form of discrimination that favors people without disabilities or able-bodied people. But be aware that the meaning or connotation of a lot of common words could be considered ableist, and keep your content free from terms like this. So one that even I need to work on because of my use of slang, thanks for calling that out again, Gabriella, is that the terms like duh or dumb, crazy or insane. So some tips for those is try to find synonyms. So instead of saying that's crazy or that's insane, say that's wild. Or I've even started quoting random pop culture references, which I know kind of contradicts, but saying things like that's inconceivable, like from Princess Bride, or, that is highly illogical, which is a quote from Spock. Just finding new ways of saying things that don't shade into historically marginalized groups' former pejoratives. And then also be aware and avoid language that would be mocking. Avoid words or language that normalizes people without disabilities. And don't assume people's ability to see, hear, read, move, or function in a particular way. Really, it's about focusing on the person again and not their ability or disability. And then there are a few words here. I'm not going to go over all of these. I'm just going to go through most of the affirmative terms, and then there's a few of the negative ones that I do want to call out specifically because they're changed in very recent memory. So affirmative terms, like we've discussed, people or person with a disability, people or a person without a disability. You want to say things like successful and productive instead of courageous or inspirational. You want to say, someone who has a traumatic brain injury, person who is deaf, someone who has epilepsy, a person with a cognitive disability, learning disability, or dyslexia, if you know that they have that specific condition. Person who is short of stature or a little person. Person with a congenital disability instead of has a birth defect. Again, this is their state of being. They're not dysfunctional. They don't have a disorder. And then, you would say someone who uses a wheelchair. They're not wheelchair bound or confined to a wheelchair. They're not, in any way negative associations with that. And then one thing that I'm trying to normalize in particular, because I'll share I have a mental health condition, is saying things like they have a mental health condition, they have clinical depression, they have bipolar, they have schizophrenia. They are not, that is not their full identity. You can't say someone is bipolar or is manic or mentally ill, crazy, insane, nuts. Those are all really not great things to say about someone who is experiencing a mental health condition. And then one thing that is somewhat new, particularly, is you want to say someone has autism or has an autism spectrum disorder instead of saying they are autistic or Asperger's. I know this one is controversial, so use your best judgment. But especially with Asperger's, you really want to move away from using that term. Dr. Asperger's behavior during World War II has increasingly come to light, and it's not really great at all. So just really move away from using that term. It's now autism spectrum disorder. And now we'll talk about plain language. So plain language is useful for all reading abilities. It also incidentally can help with your SEO. And it's typically written at about a 6th to 8th grade level. Again, with translation, especially if you're utilizing the auto translate feature from Google or the one that colorado.gov has embedded in it. And really it just means changing words into a simpler one. And there's a really great tool here. There's an image on the screen of the Hemingway application. And what it does is it will go through your writing and highlight areas that could be rephrased. And then it gives color code. And again, I know that's not the most accessible. You know, it's using highlighting and it's using color for meanings. That can be a little bit difficult, but it is one tool in the toolbox that can help with your writing. But some practical tips are, first and foremost, get organized. I like to start with an outline. And that really helps for your headings. It helps with breaking up your content. And for me, also, it just helps with brainstorming. So start with an outline and organize with your audience, your specific audience in mind in this case. Make sure that you are keeping your sections of information short, so your paragraphs to 3 to 5 sentences. If you're using a step-by-step process, use the steps to guide the reader along, and then break up the content into digestible sections, and then use images that convey meaning and to visually break up walls of text. So we'll get into more detail on that. First, headings. You won't get through a presentation about writing with TAP without talking about headings. So there are 3 types of headings. There's question headings. So like if you're doing an FAQ, you would do, a question and answer. Action headings are sort of like, what to do next, how to do blank. And then there's topical headings. And topical headings are the most common, but think through if there's a better way of phrasing your heading than just the topic. Sometimes an action or a question heading might be better and more compelling for your reader. Then there's a really big thing to call out with headings, and that is heading order. And so we know we've talked about this in the past, but I want to get into this again. Begin with heading 1, so the title of a web page. I know with Google Docs, there's some back and forth over whether to start with heading 1 or title for the title of the document, so use your best judgment. I will call out that if you're using Google Docs and then you download, that the title tag doesn't come with it. So if you're planning to download your Google Doc, start with heading 1. Then use heading 2 for the main topic headings, and then 3 for subtopics, and then 4, 5, and 6 as appropriate. Do not go beyond heading level 6. And then also after your heading, utilize a topic-based introduction. So this is just a quick couple sentences to really help organize your information, and it moves the most important information up to the front of your content to really help the reader engage with what you're saying. And then also it helps readers not have to hold on to a lot of information mentally while they're going through your content. They know what the main point is. Oh yes, and then really quick, Danielle recommends don't skip over heading levels either. You need to use them in numerical order. So definitely do not use 4, 5, and 6 unless you've used 1, 2, and 3 already. But then hopping back to the introductions, and then also give each paragraph you're writing an introductory sentence. And then another thing we'll talk about a little bit later on is you can also utilize a transition to help bridge between paragraph and paragraph. And then a good side benefit of topic sentences and headings is that it helps you see your document and see it in a more organized way. And then it also helps you rearrange your material when you're reviewing. So once you get all done, you're like, well, maybe I should move these around. Having those will help you when you're reviewing to key in on your organization. Oopsie daisy, I clicked on the wrong thing. There we go. And then lists. So both unordered and ordered lists. So ordered lists are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And unordered are bullet lists, are really important in plain writing, or plain language rather, in particular. They can help highlight things that are important. They help readers understand the order in which things will happen. You can help readers skim. It makes it easier to understand all the steps in the process, and also even just call out that it is a process and not just like a one and done type of thing. And then also it introduces a little bit more white space, and it is an ideal way to present items, conditions, exceptions, and you'll notice that throughout this presentation, I've made heavy use of lists because it's just helpful in a lot of respects for organization. And use guiding language. I kind of referred to this already, but at the beginning of your paragraphs, and as you transition from thought to thought, think through like saying things like in addition, or you can do pointing words that are like this and that and those, and then echoing, where if there's a really important point, you can echo it and then begin the new thought. And then the explicit connectives, which are, further also in addition, those kinds of transitions. And then always create a conversation with your reader. So, and like I'm going to call out the one thing that really, anyone who's seen me do copywriting, I go on and on about this, but active voice is so important, especially when you're trying to have someone do something. Like, are they needing to fill out a form? Are they needing to give your folks a call? Like, it's so important to use the active voice. If you utilize a lot of like passive voice where, you have long sort of intros into the sentence and then you get to it, or you're trying to like sort of soften the message, sometimes you might end up softening it so much people don't understand what you're trying to say. So active just means, the person does something or they need to do something. It's really verb oriented. And it really helps to create power in your messaging too. And then it again, it's so important for if there's something required, use the words like must. I know in bills it says shall, and that's in legal language it says shall, but that is it's a term that's not used very frequently in normal spoken voice. So say must or need to, so that people understand that something is a requirement. And then choose your words carefully. So sort of leave the literary flair for novels and stories. When you're writing for government, you want to make sure that it's pretty plain spoken, that you're using the simplest form of a word when possible. Unless you're quoting statute, then obviously that is challenging. Try to not use highly technical terms, jargon, legalese, and then try to limit like unusual words too. If it's something that is not commonly used when people are speaking, try to leave it out if possible. And then in government, this is the big one, limit your use of acronyms. And if you need to use an acronym, make sure that you've spelled it out the first time you use it. You put it in parentheses right after that usage so that you're telling the reader specifically what the acronym means. And then in longer text or in the beginning of new sections, I recommend doing that again, just because people may not remember, or they might have just hopped right to that section and skipped over it. So if you have really like long content, like if this is a long document, like an annual report, it might be a good idea to, every time you start a new major section of the document, reuse the full name, then put the acronym again. And then also abbreviations can be really confusing because not everyone abbreviates things in the same way or utilizes the standard abbreviations for things. So it's really important to just spell out the word, even if you've used it a bunch. It's very important. And then use contractions. I know this is a big departure, especially if we're talking bills and legal writing, but contractions make your writing more approachable, and it's how we talk. So if you're trying to create a conversation with the reader, it's super important to be a little bit more casual in the way that you communicate. And then finally, design for reading. So use simple typography or font. Like, this is important for accessibility. It's important for plain language. Highlight key elements using boldface only, no caps, no italics, no underlining. Avoid complex or unusual punctuation. Try to limit the use of slashes, except for when writing fractions. It can create ambiguity and confusion. Minimize cross-references in your content. This can cause confusion. Sometimes things just bear repeating, so if it's really important, repeat it. Use tables only for data, not to format written content, and then break up your information into manageable chunks. I can't say this enough. If you keep your paragraph short, your sentences short, it will get the reading level of your document down, or your web page down to the 8th grade range. And then some additional stuff. Make sure that the context or the content that is not written conveys meaning. I am the first to admit I enjoy decorative images. So if I know it's really tempting to use them, but if they're not conveying meaning or adding tonality that's important to the user experience, just pull it out. But some things that can be helpful are graphic elements like icons, because those do convey meaning, and they can also help the reader key in on important things straight away. So icons are fine. Just limit the use of, like, borders or beautiful images behind text, because that can hinder people's ability to understand. And then, like we've mentioned a bunch of times, always, always, always use alternative text whenever you use an image or a graphic. It's very important so that a screen reader can pick up on what you're presenting as well. And I accidentally exited out of the presentation. That is my bad. So while I get that back up, does anyone have any questions? Corey.
Hi, Becky. Thank you for your wonderful training. I just have one quick question on not alternative text, but descriptive language for complex images. I was asked me the other day if we could provide a link to descriptive language for a complex document. So instead of having it right there, and I'm not sure why that request was there. I'm sure there's a reason. I'm not sure what it is, but is that allowed? So basically, if you can catch my drift, like you have that complex document, and then under it for description of what's going on here, you review the description of the image, and then it just takes you to a document that would describe that image. I don't know why that was wanted, but I do want to know if it was allowed first before I answered.
I mean, I think it kind of is, Lori. I think we talked about this in the past. I think it is technically a text alternative, but from like a user experience perspective, I think it has some concerns. Maybe you can talk to it better, Lori.
Yeah. So if I understand the question correctly, a long description within the text of the document or presentation or whatever.
So maybe let me be a little more clear, Lori. I apologize. So you have an image or you have a document. So inside the website, you have a link to a complex document, which is a graph, right?
Okay.
So you click on the link. Here opens up the graph, and on that document, it then has a link saying for a description, review the descriptive information on this graph, and that would take you to another document. Which then takes you to another document, Lori, and another document. No, I'm kidding.
No, I get it. Yeah. I think there is a user experience issue there. Maybe the graph is in the original document and you link to the long description, but that is the the technical term is a long description for complex images. And you can either, link off to another document or to a web page where that image is described. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Thank you, Lori. And then I got it back. I apologize. I'm still practicing with this new way of presenting. Sorry. So the last thing actually is test assumptions. So this is really important. We all have assumptions that we may or may not be conscious of. So few things, practical tips: read your writing aloud to determine if it flows the same way that you speak. Have colleagues from diverse groups review your content for inclusion and equity. Take a long look at the appearance of the content for visual appeal. Does it look visually confusing? If so, maybe change it up. And then don't overuse layout and typography devices. So if you have a very long document, sometimes it can become repetitive, and a little bit of visual difference does help break up the content as well. And then really quick, I really like this quote. One should aim not at being possible to understand, but at being impossible to misunderstand. I really like that last bit, because even the beginning of the quote is a little hard to understand, but the point is to be impossible to misunderstand. And so we have two links in the presentation that, Lori, thank you for putting it in the chat, to our inclusive language and plain language content. And as always, if you have questions, you can reach out to me directly.